Hello student, I am your APT ma'am. Today we are going to discuss a very interesting topic, that is the respiratory system in human and the mechanism of breathing. Now in the previous class we have already discussed about the breathing, respiration, their differences and the types of respiration. Now in this class we actually try to learn about the mechanism and the principle through which the breathing is executed. Okay, now let's start. Now first of all, the respiratory system. Now it's a very special system found in the organism which is involved in the breathing and the respiration. Okay, now if we see the respiratory system, now there are several structures that are involved. Now the first one is the nostril. Now nostril is actually the opening. Now in our body, at the tip of the nose there are two openings. Now these two openings are known as the nostril. Now this nostril is very important for taking in of oxygenated gas and take out of the deoxygenated gas. Next structure after the nostril is the nasal cavity. Now just feel after the nostril in the nose there is a chamber or the cavity. Okay, now this cavity is known as the nasal cavity or the nasal chamber. Now the whole chamber is surrounded or covered by the hair cells. Now these hair cells are very important because they prevent the entry of the dust and the harmful materials that are present in the air. Okay, that means it's actually filter the air. After the nasal cavity, the next part is a tubular structure, and that is the trachea or the windpipe. Now see here, the trachea is a tubular structure that is supported by some cartilaginous C-shaped rings. Now these are the C-shaped rings which cover the whole length of the trachea. Now it gives support to the trachea. And after that, the trachea is branched into two parts and take entry inside the lungs. Now lung is the main respiratory organ in the human. Now these two branches of the trachea are known as the bronchus in singular and bronchi in the plural. Now here right bronchus and the left bronchus, and the lung, right lung and the left lung. And after, now these two are the bronchus, and after the entry of bronchus into the lungs, it get divided into another step of branching. Now these branches are known as the bronchioles, and again the bronchioles are branched into many fine structures, and these fine structures are ended with the air sac or alveolar sac. Now this alveolar sac is very important for the gaseous exchange, that means exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and the blood, because this alveolar sac is surrounded by the blood capillary. Now here the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary artery are involved. Now in this case, the pulmonary artery contains or carries the deoxygenated or CO2 content blood, and the pulmonary vein contains the O2 or oxygenated blood. Okay, now in this case the pulmonary artery contains or carries the deoxygenated or CO2 content blood, and the pulmonary vein contain the O2 or oxygenated blood. Okay, Now these are the components of the respiratory system. But what's about the position of the lungs in our body? Now let's see. Now see here, the lungs is actually present in the chest position or at the chest cavity, and the chest cavity is also known as the thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity. Now here the thoracic cavity is surrounded by the rib cage or the ribs. Now see here, this is the sternum and these are the ribs, and in the rib cage there are 12 pairs of ribs. Okay, and this thoracic cavity or the whole chest cavity is separated from our abdominal cavity by a muscular layer known as the diaphragm. Now this is the diaphragm. So the lungs is present inside this rib cage, okay, and just above the diaphragm. Now see here, if we go to the previous slide, now see here the right lung has 3 lobes, first, second and the third, and the left one has 2, 1 and 2. Now see here, this is a notch or curvature or depression. Now this portion is important for the placement of the heart in between these 2 lungs. Okay, that means in the chest cavity or the thoracic cavity there are 2 organs, one is lung and another is heart. Okay, so next one, the structure that are involved or important for the breathing. So breathing, it's a physical process of taking the oxygenated air and release of the deoxygenated air into the atmosphere. Now in this breathing there are several important structures in our body. The first one is the chest cavity or the ribs, because in between the ribs there is a special type of muscle known as intercostal muscles. Okay, now these intercostal muscles are very important for the changing of shape of the chest cavity. When these intercostal muscles are contracted or squeezed, the size or the volume of the chest cavity is expanded or increased, and whenever they relaxed, again the chest cavity decrease its size. And the next structure is the diaphragm. Now diaphragm is a muscular layer that separates the chest cavity or the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. Now whenever the diaphragm moves downwards, our volume of the chest cavity expands, and when it moves upward, its volume again decreases. So there are 2 structures, one is intercostal muscle and another is the diaphragm, that are involved in the breathing. Okay, now the mechanism of breathing. Now breathing is completed by 2 steps. One is inhalation and another is the exhalation. Inhalation is actually the taking of oxygenated air, and exhalation is the release of deoxygenated air into the atmosphere. But when the inhalation progress, the structure that are involved in the breathing, they are actually changed in a certain way. Now what are they? At first, the diaphragm, this diaphragm moves downward, and simultaneously the intercostal muscles between the ribs are contracted. As a result, the overall size of the chest cavity increase. Now see here, this is the downward movement of the diaphragm and contraction of the intercostal muscles. Now see here, in the first step, see the size of the chest cavity, and see here at the second case, see the size of the chest cavity. So you can easily find out the difference. In the first stage, the diameter is less. Now here the diameter is larger, so our chest cavity expands. So as a result, there is a suction pressure inside the lungs, and thus the oxygenated air take entry inside the lungs through the trachea. Okay, and after that, this oxygenated air comes to the alveoli, and the oxygen is delivered to the blood, and after that the carbon dioxide is released into the alveolar sac, so the lungs is filled up with the carbon dioxide. Now the whole process will be reversed. Now so what happened? Now see here, the diaphragm which moves downwards again move upward, and the intercostal muscles in between the ribs again relaxed. So the overall size of the chest cavity again decreases. As a result, the lungs will be deflated or squeezed, and the deoxygenated air which is present inside the lung is thrown out through the trachea and the nostril into the atmosphere. And in this way, we take the oxygenated air and we release the deoxygenated or carbon dioxide rich air into the atmosphere. Okay, now see here the pathway after the taking of the oxygen. Now at first, the oxygen rich air is present into the atmosphere, and then due to the downward movement of the diaphragm and contraction of the intercostal muscle, this state, the size of the chest cavity is increased, and as a result there is a suction pressure inside the lungs. Now what happened? The air which is oxygen rich, which is present into the atmosphere, take entry inside the nasal cavity, and then into the pharynx, into the trachea or windpipe, then bronchi, then bronchiole, and then the alveoli. Now in these alveoli, we actually release the oxygen into the blood, and we take the carbon dioxide from the blood. Okay, now after that, now here the gaseous exchange. Now after taking of the carbon dioxide, now the air which is present into the air sac again follow the reverse pathway. That means from air sac or alveoli to bronchioles, then bronchi, then trachea, then pharynx, then nasal cavity, and then at the atmosphere. But here Again, the diaphragm moves upward and the intercostal muscle relaxed. So there is a pressure on the lungs, and as a result we release the carbon dioxide rich air into the atmosphere. So this is all about the mechanism of breathing and the way of oxygen and carbon dioxide transport. Okay, now we will see a experiment through which we can easily understand the mechanism of breathing. Now let's start.
Mechanism of breathing in human beings. Let us understand the process of breathing through a simple experiment. Take a transparent plastic bottle. Remove its bottom. Then take a rubber ball, Y-shaped plastic tube and two deflated balloons. Now to each fork end of the tube, fix the balloons. Cap the bottle with cord. Put the tube attached to the balloons inside the bottle from its open bottom. Make a hole in the cord and pass the open end of the tube outside the bottle through the hole. Now tie a rubber sheet at the bottom of the bottle tightly so that no air can pass through it. Pull down the rubber sheet and watch the balloons get inflated. Now push the rubber sheet inside the bottle and watch the balloons collapse. How do the balloons get inflated and deflated when we pull or push the rubber sheet? When we pull the rubber sheet outwards, the space inside the bottle increases and the air inside the bottle becomes lighter. So the dense air rushes into the balloons from outside. The air enters the tube through the opening outside the bottle. Then the air travels through the tube and enters the two branches of the tubes and into the balloons. When we push the rubber sheet inside, the space in the jar is reduced and the pressure is increased. This pushes the air out of the balloons. The balloons get deflated. Now let us see how this correlates to the breathing system. The bottle is like a human body. There is an empty space or a cavity inside the body filled with air called body cavity. The rubber sheet is the diaphragm which divides the body into two parts. The upper part is the
So I hope you can understand the mechanism of breathing. Okay, now the next one, the inhaled air and the exhaled air. What are the differences? Now see here, the oxygen content and the carbon dioxide content in these both gases. In case of inhaled air, the oxygen content is 21%, whereas in the exhaled air it's only 17%. And in the inhaled air, the carbon dioxide content is 0.04%, whereas in the exhaled air it's about 4%. So we can easily find out that in the inhaled air the oxygen content is higher than the exhaled one, and in the exhaled air the carbon dioxide content is higher than the inhaled air. Okay, but how can we identify the presence of carbon dioxide in the exhaled air? Now let's see another experiment. Okay.
Demonstrate that exhaled air has carbon dioxide gas. Things required: a test tube, a straw, lime water. Procedure: take a test tube and pour some lime water into it. Take a straw and exhale air into the lime water in the test tube. You will notice that lime water in the test tube becomes milky white. Lime water turns milky white only when carbon dioxide is mixed with it. Thus, it is obvious from the above activity that exhaled air has carbon dioxide.
So this is a very simple and basic experiment that through which we can easily find out the presence of carbon dioxide into the exhaled air. Okay, I hope you understand it. Thank you.